All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going deep, really deep into the heart of the South China Sea. Specifically, that pivotal arbitration case the Philippines brought against China back in 2013. We've got some incredible material to unpack here.
Yeah, this is a big one.
Yeah.
And to even begin to understand it, we need to talk about UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It's basically the rule book for everything that happens out on the ocean.
Right, like who gets to do what and where. And a key part of UNCLOS is this thing called Annex 7th, a process for countries to resolve disputes.
Exactly. So that's the mechanism the Philippines used in 2013. They went to this special tribunal asking for some serious clarification on their rights versus China's in the South China Sea.
And there's a lot to clarify. Historical claims, rights to resources, the different zones, different geographic features can generate under the law. Not to mention, were China's actions even legal under this whole framework?
Huge questions. And right off the bat, China said, nope, not participating, won't accept any outcome. Which, kind of throws a wrench in the whole idea of international law if a major power just decides to opt out.
For sure. But the arbitration went ahead anyway. A 5-member tribunal was formed, led by Judge Thomas A. Mensah. It's really interesting how, even when one side refuses to cooperate, the system still figures out a way to appoint arbitrators and move forward.
It does. And the tribunal's mandate was very specific. They were there to interpret and apply UNCLOS, nothing more, not deciding who owns which islands, no drawing up maritime boundaries unless both countries agree. China hammered on this point a lot, claiming the whole thing was just a veiled attempt to settle the sovereignty question.
Yeah, and you can definitely see the strategy in how the Philippines presented their case. They stuck to arguing about how UNCLOS should be applied, not directly challenging China's claims of ownership over the islands. Smart.
Really smart. So, the first hurdle for the tribunal was jurisdiction. Do they even have the authority to rule on the Philippines' claims? In October 2015, they made a preliminary decision on some of those points.
So let's break it down. The tribunal basically said, yep, we can rule on this for a whole bunch of important stuff. The legal status of Scarborough Shoal, whether places like Mischief Reef and Second Thomas Shoal are just low tide elevations, the zones generated by features like Johnson Reef, China's actions towards Filipino fishermen near Scarborough Shoal.
Right. And then there was the whole question of environmental obligations under UNCLOS.
Tons of stuff. And their reasoning is fascinating. Like with Scarborough Shoal, it all boiled down to whether UNCLOS defines it as a rock. Because a rock doesn't create a big exclusive economic zone like an island would. Same thing with those reefs. If they're just low tide elevations, they don't generate any maritime zones at all.
Exactly. The classification of those features has huge consequences for what countries can claim under UNCLOS.
Now, on some other claims, the tribunal initially said, hold on, we need to dive deeper into the actual facts of this case before deciding on jurisdiction. This included some really big ones. The full extent of maritime entitlements for each country, what legal weight, if any, China's 9-dash line actually has, and whether China was illegally interfering with the Philippines' access to resources. Obviously, those are much more tangled up with the core of the dispute.
They are. But then, in their final award issued in July 2016, the tribunal did assert jurisdiction over those remaining points. Often, their actual findings on the merits clarified how these issues tied back to UNCLOS, which brought them squarely within their mandate. Pretty neat, huh?
It is, but it's super important to remember what the tribunal wasn't ruling on. No decisions on who owns what island, no drawing of boundaries. And they also couldn't touch on future Chinese military activities because of a specific declaration China had made under UNCLOS back in 2006.
Right. So then, the big question, what did the Philippines actually win? And the answer is a lot.
Yeah, some really significant stuff. The tribunal said China's claims to maritime rights can't go beyond what UNCLOS allows. Basically, they declared that 9-dash line invalid anywhere it exceeds UNCLOS limits. They also found no legal basis for those historical rights China claims to resources within that line. That strikes at the core of China's position in the South China Sea.
It totally does. But there's more. The tribunal ruled that Scarborough Shoal is just a rock, meaning no expansive EEZ. Mischief Reef, Second Thomas Shoal, and Subi Reef, all classified as low-tide elevations, so no territorial sea or EEZ. And most importantly, not something China can just occupy and claim as their own. They even specifically said Mischief Reef and Second Thomas Shoal are part of the Philippines EEZ.
Wow. And they didn't just stop at defining the features. They also called out specific actions by China that violated UNCLOS.
Oh, yeah. Interfering with Filipino fishing and oil exploration. failing to prevent Chinese nationals from exploiting resources in the Philippines waters, blocking traditional Filipino fishing at Scarborough Shoal, even damaging the marine environment, and those construction activities on Mischief Reef. Also a violation.
And it wasn't just about resources and construction. The tribunal also addressed those incidents where China used their law enforcement vessels in a really dangerous way and how they basically escalated the whole dispute after the arbitration process began. They found those actions violated their obligations too. And on top of all that, they issued a declaration saying China has to respect the Philippines' rights under UNCLOS.
So on paper, it was a clear legal win for the Philippines. But as we know, China has rejected the entire award and refuses to comply. It really highlights how difficult it is to enforce international law when you've got a powerful country that just disagrees.
So, to sum it all up, this deep dive shows us how the Arbitral Tribunal, working strictly within the rules of UNCLOS, largely sided with the Philippines. They provided some much-needed clarity on international maritime law and really undermined some key parts of China's very expansive claims in the South China Sea.
Absolutely. This award is a landmark decision, a major clarification of what UNCLOS actually means. But with China refusing to comply, it raises a really important question, and it's one I want to leave you with. If international legal mechanisms have these limitations when big, powerful states just don't want to play ball, what else can change the game? Is it diplomacy, economic pressure, maybe shifts in regional power dynamics? What will it really take to resolve these incredibly complex geopolitical disputes? It's something worth thinking about.